the stiffener is not good, and so a lot of people tend to apply too much of stiffener, that is a very thick mixture, and then afterwards again, and if you are lucky that you now bought a very terrible stiffener or a stiffener that is not good, you discover that after molding, there's this mirror-like image or stains on the surface of your molded. As you can see, they have it in a more block. So we got this yesterday. And do you know one amazing thing about this is we used 2 different layers of fabric. We use the sinamay and the papermat. We use the sinamay fabric, and we use the paper mat fabric. And well, I'm sure a lot of people do that, but I'm so sure also that a lot of people do not know that they can do that. So this video is for those that do not know that they can actually combine the sinamay fabric and the paper mat fabric. You know, at times, because really the sinamay fabric you have nowadays, at times they are usually too light. That is very, very, the holes are, this is still fair, at least you have the tiny holes. And then there are some that the grade is so low that you have too much, the holes are so big, and then when you decide to use just 2 layers of sinamay and then you mold on your fabric, it comes out very transparent. It comes out very transparent and very light. Though there are some customers that really don't want something heavy or too thick, but the typical Nigerian woman or a typical Nigerian would always want their hearts or their head to be very firm. They believe that once it's light, like it's not original, which is not so. But just to be on the safer side, to be well balanced. So most times, at times, except the customer specifies that I want the sinamay fabric, but if not, I always advise people to use the sinamay fabric. Sorry, please, my office is on the express, so you may hear some background noises. So I always advise to use the sinamay fabric, 1 layer of sinamay fabric, and 1 layer of. So let's assume that you have your paper mat, and there's a trick. You know, most times some people mold. They wet their fabric, they wet their paper mat, they wet their sinamay, and they mold. And then after molding, you mix your stiffener, and then you brush with your stiffener on the molded or blocked fascinator or headwear. But there's something I've discovered that okay, you have your paper mat here, and then you have your sinamay on top. And I've actually come to discover that at times this paper mat, it's just like if you have actually gone to when you were in secondary school, or remember we used to do something like paper mache then, you know, paper mache where we soak our papers inside the stiffener. Then we used to use starch. We soak our paper inside starch, and then we newspaper, cut it into pieces, we soak it inside starch, and then bring it. By the time you bring it out, the paper, newspaper, or whatever kind of paper, different kind of pieces would have absorbed that starch, and then we now mold it on whatever shape, maybe a cup, a pot, and then it brings out that shape, and it comes out very thin. So I've come to understand that when this paper mat is a paper, it's a paper woven fabric. If you see it, if you cut it like this, you can see it can cut. So it's made of paper fabric. But when you insert it or immerse it into your stiffener mixture, it absorbs, it has that ability to really, really absorb that stiffener, and then stiffener, and then when it comes out firm. So I see a lot of people that after they have molded, their jobs comes out, even with paper mats, and then after molding, they apply there, and it comes by the time after molding, the stiffener is not good, so a lot of people tend to apply too much of stiffener, that is a very thick mixture, and then afterwards again, and if you are lucky that you now bought a very terrible stiffener or a stiffener that is not good, you discover that after molding, there's this mirror-like image or stains on the surface of your molded job. And then a lot of milliners, they start looking for sprays to spray their job. I rarely use sprays except for silver and gold, because we really do not have the dye mixture for silver and then gold. So that's the only occasion where I use them sprays. So really, if you have a good stiffener, no matter how light it is, of course when you buy the stiffener, you really don't need to make your stiffener so thick. Once this paper mat has really absorbed the dye, trust me, your work will come out strong. So what I advise is when you are using 2 different types of layers, like 2 different layers, maybe you're using the paper mat and you're using the sinamay to mold, ensure that it's going to be a dirty job. But trust me, you will enjoy the finishing. You will love the finishing. Just like you can see this. This was molded with 2 different layers, fabrics. You can see sinamay here, and you can see the paper mat underneath. I'm still going to remove it so that you're going to see it, and you can see our job. Okay, so now, once you've inserted this or immerse this in your stiffener mixture, you just take it inside. You're not squeezing, you're not I already did another video for that. You can go to our YouTube channel, you see a video on how to do that. So you insert it in. All you just need to do is press it like this. Let that stiffener enter into it, and then so the thickness of stiffener you're going to be using for your paper mat will definitely be different from what you're going to be using for your paper mat. So now you want to use 2 different layers. You want to use sinamay, and you want to use paper mat, and you want to use paper mat. Of course, you cannot use the same thickness of stiffener. That's the problem. That's where I come in now. The thickness you're going to be using for paper mats, or I mean the thickness of stiffener you're going to be using for paper mat, is going to be a thick one.